Hello, everyone. My name is William Meader, and welcome to this presentation. And the topic today is entitled, In the Name of Light. And my goal today is to share with you how this philosophy looks at the nature of light itself, and in particular, what constitutes spiritual light, and how does that light affect us, particularly from a consciousness point of view. So a lot of our discussion will be based upon understanding that, and hopefully it'll give you some ideas about sort of how to recognize some of those deeper spiritual lights trying to find expression through you. So the way it's going to work is that I'm going to focus first on what are called the three periodical vehicles. Now that's just a term that means the three parts within us that represent our sense of identity. There's the lower self, that's the personality. It's a carrier of a type of light. Then we have the soul itself, which is what we're all striving to live more and more from. That too is an agency of spiritual light. And then there's something beyond the soul that is very remote that most of us, if any of us, would have any sense of it at this point. But it's the kind of light that is connected to what we call the monad. The monad is beyond the soul. The monad represents the pure spiritual beingness. It is the essence of life itself. It is the spark of life that emits from the one life. So each of us have three structures within us that represent who we are. So personality, soul, and monad. And the personality and the soul are the ones that are most relevant to where you and I would be on our evolutionary journey. But the day will come when we approach being a liberated master, where that third level becomes much more the center of one's consciousness, and it emits a type of light that's different. So we'll talk about that. So my goal is to first lay out some of the understanding of light in those categories. Then I want to spend some time on a very, very interesting subject having to do with the light within the head, also called the lighted lamp. And so we're going to explore that very deeply and hopefully give you some sense of its role in your evolution. And then, just depending upon time, I may have an opportunity to touch a little bit on the various lights associated with the seven rays. So we've got a full agenda here. And so let's dive into it. Now, I'm going to start this with a sentence, actually, a single sentence. And I would say that if there is one thing I would like you to remember above everything else that I have to share with you today, is this one sentence. Because this one sentence encapsulates the essence of understanding every category of life that we will be talking about, light that we will be talking about today in this talk. And that sentence is this: light is known by what it reveals. Light is known by what it reveals. So let me kind of give you an example. Right here, I'm sitting here, and right over here, I have a window that I can see outside, and there's a beautiful tree outside. And let's talk about it from a physical light perspective first. I can see that tree because sunlight is hitting that tree. It's reflecting off of the tree and hitting my eyes. So light is known by what it reveals. In this case, a tree. And so that's obvious, a physical expression of light. But the key concept here is that it also pertains to deeper psychological light, like the light of love, like the light of wisdom, like the light of purpose, like the light of idealism, many, many types of light. And that's important because here's the key concept when it comes to spiritual light. If light is known by what it reveals, the key word is reveal. In other words, when we talk about this subject of light, psychologically and spiritually, the kind of light we want to talk about is always revelatory. It brings something in that wasn't realized before. You know, it's funny how we use the word light in our day-to-day language, actually. You know, we say, for instance, I want to shed light on something. To shed light on something suggests convey something that isn't understood. by others. So I want to shed light. Sometimes we say, use the word dawn, it dawned on me. Something dawned on me. So that idea of a new light is coming into our awareness. Light, it can be used, the term light can be used to recognize a kind of ignition. It's as if when a new idea is presented, it ignites, it gives light to those who are hearing it for the first time or sensing it for the first time. You know, we use the word light in other ways too. We talk about, for instance, a lighthouse. And in that context, it sort of represents light as a directional beacon, which it is as well, spiritual light. We even use the word to enlightenment. To be enlightened is to be light-filled. So it's really important to just kind of widen our thoughts about what is light. Each of us is, how to put this? Each of us is a carrier of a variety of types of light. And in a certain sense, what we talk about as spiritual service, it's driven by the light that is coming through each of us as a function of service and upliftment to others. So this whole subject also has a tremendous relationship to that question of how can I make an uplifting contribution to the betterment of something beyond myself, which is one of the mandates of the soul. You know, the soul is said to be governed by a variety of spiritual laws. And one of those laws, the third law, is called the law of service. Every soul wants to find a way of expressing its lighted wisdom through the personality. It wants to do that without the personality unduly getting in the way, which is the challenge. And in so doing, it wants to make an uplifting contribution to the betterment of something beyond itself. But what is it that is the underlying energy or underlying spiritual force that is being presented in the outer world? It's a type of spiritual light. And we'll get into various types. But in a way, it's the story for all of us. It has to do with always this type of spiritual light holds the underlying principles of all manifestation. It's to recognize within each of us an inner reality and finding ways of making that inner reality a manifested outer form or set of forms. And for each of us is trying to be a spiritual disciple in a way, and we're trying to bring light into dark places, whatever that light might be. You know, it's so much of the work has to do with introducing the germ of a new and progressive idea. And that's important to understand what service is. It's to bring forth an embryonic concept and find ways of bringing it into outer existence. It's, service in this sense is about evoking right thinking or an awakening right thought and influencing public opinion in a positive way. And so much of the subject of light has to do with how you make a difference in the world and in what is the quality of the energy working through you to support that difference, you see? So, key concepts. So as I said earlier, light is known by what it reveals. So the term light and revelation are important. And then there's another term, and that's evolution. So light is revelatory, and revelation is what facilitates evolution. So in a certain sense, all of human evolution is really the ongoing pressure of revelation, revelatory light, pushing humanity forward and awakening consciousness over time to new understandings of reality. And so it's the very force that is driving evolution forward. So let's begin by talking about these types of lights as they pertain to the three periodical vehicles. Remember, it's personality, soul, and the monad, pure spirit. So the personality, and in this philosophy, we also often talk about the personality is the thing that often gets in the way, and it can. There's no question about it that our lower ego can be a very strong obstacle to the soul. But nonetheless, the soul will need that personality to be its outer garment of service in the outer world. And it carries certain essential lights. For instance, the personality is the custodian of what is called the light of knowledge, the light of knowledge. And there's no question that knowledge, in the human experience, knowledge has had a tremendous important effect on humanity's evolution. And it's also, the personality has the light of desire as a part of it as well. There's something to be learned about life through how we desire things. And so it reveals some aspect of ourselves through our recognition of desire. And eventually, when you wake up to the soul, then that light of knowledge and that light of desire must slowly yield to this higher kind of light that's trying to be emitted by your causal body, your soul's vehicle deep within. And eventually, the knowledge that the personality has, which is sacred in its own right, that knowledge, that light of knowledge, is to be used as a contributing agency to the soul's agenda. So instead of knowledge for knowledge's sake, it becomes knowledge in support of a deeper kind of wisdom that the soul is trying to bring forward into the outer world. But the light of personality, generally speaking, is the fundamental lights that drive humanity as a whole today. The light of ego, the light of individuality, the light of ambition. All of those are forms of light, even though for us who are on the path, they're kind of lower expressions of light. For people that are just kind of coming into their personality and integrating it, the light of ambition, the light of knowledge is kind of a prized type of light. So it's all relative to where we stand on the path, whether a type of light that's working through us is indicating an emphasis or something to be more and more put into a secondary position. For us, most of you, I would assume, have had your awakening. Most of you have, I would assume, you are sensing that deeper quality within you, which is the soul's light. And that more and more we realize that the light of the personality must be dimmed in order to give greater radiance to the light of the soul. So let's talk about the lights of the soul for just a moment. And I'm giving you broad terms because there's so many forms of spiritual light. In fact, I'm going to show you a list of a few in a moment. But look at the light of the soul. Well, so what if the personality's one of its fundamental lights is the light of knowledge? To the soul, it's actually the light of wisdom that is its prerogative. So wisdom is has a higher octave of expression within all of us. Wisdom stands on the shoulders of the light of knowledge, but is more than knowledge. Wisdom could be understood as a combination of three things. It has a knowledge component to it that is offered to it over many incarnations by the personality. It has the element of love and inclusivity involved in it. And it also has the element of experience, knowledge, love, and experience. That's one of the many definitions of wisdom. Now, having said that, that's a major type of light. So anytime you feel, it's important to discern the difference between the light of wisdom as experienced within us versus the light of knowledge that's also experienced within us. And that distinction is important because that helps us that becomes kind of a measurement of when is the soul functioning in my immediate consciousness and when is the personality more dominating at any given time in our day-to-day lives. And again, the goal is to fuse them so that the lower becomes supportive of the higher, so that your personality's knowledge becomes a contributing agency in support of the wisdom of the soul. There's also the light of love that the soul emerges. Now, actually, personality has a light of love as well. But in the case of the personality, that quality of love that light of the personality's love, that's a love that has a strong personal component to it. It's the kind of love that you feel, but it's a love of something or someone. Whereas the soul's light of love, that love is a type of love that is more impersonal by comparison. It's having to do with recognizing the light of love as the love of humanity, the love of the one, which is why when you really step onto the path, it's that kind of love that becomes the driving force in support of your commitment to life. Doesn't mean that the lower kind of love, the personal love, is negated. Not at all. There's nothing inherently incorrect about having a loving personal relationship with somebody. Not at all. But this higher kind of love is what becomes more and more operative in our consciousness. So this higher type of light, so to speak. You know, the soul is also it's the light of unity that is also very, very strongly related to what is soul. You know, and the light of the soul. While the personality, its light is often the light of separative consciousness, the soul is the agency of unitive consciousness. When that light is being sensed within each of us, this unitive type, it means that we're starting to sense that underlying the diversity of all things in the outer world, that there's this sense that actually on a deeper level, it is all connected together. It's all united together. And when you have those moments where you sense that kind of lightedness, the light of unity, it's an inner unity. And when you have that, at that moment, the soul, the causal body, is contributing to the shaping of one's perception at that time. So these are all important because each one kind of gives us a sense of a distinction potential between our higher and lower nature. Actually, and that's so crucial to the path, really. It's to know the difference between when our lower consciousness is operative versus when our higher consciousness is operative. And to make that distinction is really, really important. And the other thing about the light of the soul, in a general sense now, the light of the soul is always a light that is trying to interface or relate two things together. You know, it is said that in some of the occult literature, there's many definitions of what is soul. What is soul? And one of the definitions is the soul is the middle principle in something. It's always uniting two things, the light of unity. Well, it's unity on many levels. It's the unity of sensing that underlying it all, as I said, we're all one. That's a unitive energy, a unitive perspective of light. But it's also internally the unity between my lower self and my highest self. You see, the soul is the agency that's mediating between personality and monad, which is way beyond the soul. And monad is not something that we're conscious of, but the day will come. But nonetheless, the monad is pure spirit, pure beingness, and it's the soul is the middle agency between personality and monad. Therefore, the soul is the light that it generates. It arises through the interface of two forces. The interface coming from the five senses of the personality, that's sort of like bottom up. But then it's also, it's the soul in us, the causal body in us, that is sensing the deeper divine nature of one's identity. It's pure life itself. It's spiritual purpose itself. And those two come together, and that's what amounts to soul consciousness in a certain sense. So always remember that soul is always trying to unify things kind of horizontally and vertically. The horizontal is I'm one, I sense that I'm one with all, and I'm united with all. But then there's the vertical, which means that my higher consciousness is the product of two forces trying to interface and reconcile themselves. I could use different words. Instead of saying monad and personality, I could say spirit and form. And or I could really extend it out into kind of a cosmic sense. I could call it God or the Logos and manifested creation. It's the same principle. And what's so interesting about this is that it's the light of the soul that ultimately will facilitate the emergence of what is called the light within the head, which I'm going to really dive into in a few moments. But deep within each of us is the potential of the light to begin to radiate within the head. But it has a lot of relationship to how well are we able to sense the light of wisdom and the light of higher love as expressed through the causal body, the soul itself. So more to be said about that in a moment. But I do want to touch on the monad. Even though the monad is out of our reach, you get to it at the front door of enlightenment. You really get to the monad. A master fully lives monad. So the monad is the consciousness or the awareness that comes from that is of a whole different category. For instance, let's use the example of, I said that the light of the personality, one of the lights is the light of separative perspective, which is why personality has got an egotistical outcome often. Light of the soul is unitive consciousness, but the light of the monad is universal consciousness. Universal consciousness. That's a whole level of awareness that we can imagine, but to fully be it, that's another story. That's another story. But again, someday that will be true. The monad's light is the light of being, while the soul and the personality, those could be called agencies of the light of becoming. You could say that the light being radiated through the personality is the light of lower becoming. The light of the soul is the light of higher becoming. But the light of the monad is being. And that's a hard thing to grasp because it's so simple to think of it in a kind of usual way that we use the word being. You know, I'll give you an example in my own life. You know, prior to this COVID-19 pandemic, my life has been dedicated to traveling in many countries around the world, teaching this philosophy. When I would come home from a long trip, say I'm in the UK for a month or something, and then I come back, you kind of want to just go into isolation. And oftentimes I'd find myself going someplace or going into isolation and just be. But that's not what I mean when I talk about beingness. That's really just the personality says, I'm exhausted, I just need to chill out. But being, with a capital B, being is absolute isness. Being is the light of your own divinity in the fullest sense. The monad is the God in you. The soul is the Christ in you. And so when you get into monadic realization, you're actually coming into the field of divine beingness. I could use an example to try to, even words fall short when we try to get into an understanding of monad. But I'll try to give you a sentence that might, in my view, inadequately try to get a sense of what does it mean to be immersed in the light of the monad. So here it would be. It's something like this. To live the monad would be to see all things as if within oneself, without an ounce of I-ness in that seeing. Let me say that again. To see all things within oneself without an ounce of I-ness in that seeing. And that's the consciousness of a master, really. So all of these are just big categories of light that I'm trying to share with you, large categories of light. But it's really interesting. A few years ago, I decided to take a lot of the esoteric literature, particularly through the Alice Bailey stream of this philosophy, and I did a word search on, I just went a computer word search on all of the writings, and I just went light of, what would come behind it. Let me show you an overhead of the kinds of light that I discovered. Types of spiritual light. Now, I have to say that this is about a third of the full list. I just didn't want to bore you with too many, but it was quite a project to really look at this. And let's just take a look at a few of them. The light of science, the light of religion, the light of philosophy, the light of livingness, the light of wisdom, the light of life itself, the light of freedom, and on it goes. There's just so many types of light. Remember, light is known by what it reveals. What does wisdom reveal? What does vision reveal? What does love reveal? These are the key ideas behind it. But I just find it very interesting that we would have so many expressions of light. So what I've given you so far are just big categories. Light as it emerges in consciousness of personality, light as it emerges as the consciousness of the soul, and light as it emerges as the consciousness of the monad. Okay, so this leads to the larger question that I want to focus on, and that is this idea that as a result of particularly the light of the soul becoming more operative in our lives, there's actually a light that emerges deep within the head of a human being, the head of the human being. So I want to shift to this whole idea of the light within the head. Now, the light within the head only starts to become operative, you might say, or you might say ignited, when a person finally reaches that incarnation where they have their awakening. Some of you have studied this a long time, and you know that there comes an incarnation where, for the first time, an individual will have an inner awakening to the soul within. It's a flashing forth, and it's fleeting, but it's a transformational moment. And from that point forward, for many incarnations till full enlightenment, life will never be the same, because the light of the causal body has consciously been recognized at that moment. Prior to that, for thousands of incarnations, spirituality was important, but it was really more based upon faith only, and the idea that theology was going to provide the answers. But when you have your awakening, you're awakening to the light of your own divinity for the first time in a conscious way. And so that's when the lighted lamp begins to spark and begins to show itself. Although it's so interesting because it is said that it flickers initially for some time, which is why when you have your awakening and you're on what we call the probationary path, you have those moments where you feel really aligned, but then you feel like you lose it, and then you get it again, and then you lose it. And so there's a whole understanding of why that is, and it's a predictable phase. But metaphorically, it corresponds to the flickering of the light within the head. Let me lay out some key ideas with the light in the head, and then we'll get into more specifics about it. But fundamentally, it's so interesting. It's often called the lighted lamp, the lighted lamp. And it is said that when that lamp begins to flicker, it catches the master's eye. Isn't that interesting? It catches the master's eye. Never forget that your soul and my soul, each of us has a soul that's connected to an inner ashram. And it's defined by the ray of your soul. So whatever your soul ray is, because there are 7 types of souls, whatever your soul ray is, that's defining what is the ashram that your soul is a participant in and a servant to. Your purpose, ultimately, your soul purpose, is to be an agent on behalf of the inner ashram and what its intention is. Now, that inner ashram is headed by a great master. In Theosophy, the masters we talk about, Master Moria, Master Kuthumi, Master Drawal Kul, Master Serapis Bey, Master Jesus, Master Hilarion. These are just a few examples of some of the major masters, but they are masters over entire inner ashrams. So for instance, the Master Moria is said to oversee the first ray ashram of will and power, while the Master Kuthumi oversees the second ray ashram, which is called the ashram of love and wisdom. Anyway, that's a whole separate subject. But what's really important today is to understand that that master of that ashram for the first time takes note when they see a new candidate coming into the field because the lighted lamp is beginning to flicker. It's as if, to use a simple way, it's as if the master recognizes, a candidate for future initiation has entered into the aura of the ashram. Take note. On with what I'm doing. So it's a very important point in terms of awakening more to your own soul light, but also it sends a signal to a greater agency of that you are coming closer to a full participation or a much fuller participation in the work of the ashram. Okay, so and so let me show you a visual on a couple of things. There's a couple of quotes I want to share with you as well that'll give us some understanding of this. So let me put an image up here for us. Now, I want to say that this, I'm calling it the light within the head. It's often called the lighted lamp, but there are many, many names for this light that will come to you. And so let me show you the first slide, which is a listing of a few of them. So it has said the light in the head, and its names given in the translations of the Yoga Sutras. Some of you know what the Yoga Sutras are, but it's the awakened inner light, the light in the head, the light of immediate cognition, that effulgent light, the light from the top of the head, the coronal light, the light of luminous disposition, the inner light, the mind full of light, the radiance in the head, the luminosity of the central organ, the light of the higher sense activity. Just a few. Those are all references to the same thing, all of them. And as I mentioned, it starts to flicker, but once there's a very critical point that happens in our development where this inner light becomes more stabilized and becomes more constant and less flickering. And that's an important time for all of us, because it means that we've come to the point in our evolution where not only have we an awareness that we have a soul that's really truly part of us, but that soul is making it, although it was sort of sporadically sensed within, now it's steady. And so from when the light is steady, it means that now there's a steady relationship between soul and personality, and there's not as much I had it and I lost it, I had it and I lost it. There's an ability to kind of hold it. And this is when you start to work and you're presenting yourself as ready for the initiatory sequence, which is another huge subject in this philosophy, but it's a major turning point as well. And when that light gets steady, then from that point forward, every step of your evolution, that light becomes more radiant. And so let me show you a quote that will help us see this. This is from The Light of the Soul, which is in the Tibetan, the Alice Bailey source. The Light of the Soul is connected to the Yoga Sutras. It says, fulfills the command of Christ. This light in the head is the great revealer, the great purifier, and the medium whereby the disciple fulfills the command of the Christ. Let your light shine. It is the path of the just which shineth ever more and more until the perfect day. It is that which produces the halo, or the circle of light seen around the heads of all the sons of God who come or are coming into their heritage. That's amazing to think about. That's really what a halo is. A halo is just a manifestation of the fully radiant light within the lighted lamp is fully radiant. And that full radiance of that light is sort of an indication of enlightenment. I could define enlightenment in 100 ways, and this would be one of them. By the way, let me back up just a minute and just highlight what I mean by this. When I say the light within the head, I don't mean the light. I don't mean something that is in your brain. I'm talking about an etheric light. Now, let me define some terms for us here. because sometimes different systems use different words. When I use the word etheric, I mean the light of your chakra system. You know, we have the major chakras and many minor chakras, but we also sometimes forget that even though we see these chakras sort of visually, we talk about them as being in front of us at different locations. The truth is your etheric body is permeating through all of you. So the etheric field, which is you might say the etheric body is the vital body. It's the living energy underlying the physical dimension of our lives. So when we talk about the lighted lamp, please do not think that this light within the head is somehow related to gray matter. It's not. In fact, you don't want to think it that way. It's a subtle energy field of etheric substance. Now, that etheric substance is said to be in the region of the pineal gland deep inside. Again, the pineal gland would be a concrete physical thing, but it's the etheric field around it that we're really talking about. And it's also got a correlation to the ventricles of the brain. Again, the etheric field underlying the ventricles. So please don't think about this as a physical light. Think about it in a subtler way. Hope that makes sense. And so that is really important to keep in mind. Let me just highlight another quote that I think might be helpful for us here. It says, "It's the center of peace within the head." Let me read this. "We are told that power is grown or developed in silence, and only he who can find a center of peace within his head, where the paths of the bodily forces and the spiritual inflowing tides meet, can rightly practice true discrimination and that dispassion which brings the controlled astral and mental bodies under the guidance of the soul." All right, so let me kind of translate all of that a little bit. The first thing to know about this light that is in the center of the etheric head is that it actually is triggered by two things, as you can see in this quote, where it says, where the third line, where the paths of the bodily forces and the spiritual inflowing tides meet. So it's so interesting to think about this. It suggests that in the center of the head, the forces of the physical, which is going to manifest as etheric in the etheric substance, it's that energy coupled with the downward gazing soul. When those two living forces interface, that's what sparks and awakens this light within the head. So it's the product, again, of a kind of two things coming together. And that's really, really important. And so that's one way of looking at this. The other thing to keep in mind is, as this quote suggests, is that when you can find that center of peace deep in the center of the etheric head, it indicates that the soul has now not only a good anchoring point within each of us, but it also tells us that the soul has therefore become more masterful of not just the physical dimension of life, but also more masterful of the emotional dimension of life, and also more the mental dimension of life. As it says at the end here, dispassion, which brings the controlled astral body, that's the emotional body, and the mental body is under the guidance of the soul. So there's a whole correlation here, friends, between the lighted lamp in its steadiness and the degree of its brightness. It has a correlation to the measure of mastery that the soul has over actually the three parts of the personality: the physical dimension, the emotional dimension, which here is called the astral, and the mental dimension. And therefore, as I said earlier, this ties into where you are on the path. So the more mastery you have, you as a soul have over your personality, and the less independent the personality is from the dictates of the soul, the brighter that light is, and the further you are on the path. And I can correlate that to each of the initiations, but that is a whole separate subject that perhaps we'll do that in the future sometime. But just understand that these things lock into each other. They're really important in that sense. So it's an indication of the measure of soul control over the personality. And what's interesting about that is that how do we develop it further? And the thing is that usually when this light within the head becomes more operative in the life, there's a couple things that we would anticipate. When it's in the flickering phase, in the early phase, which can last more than one incarnation, by the way, that flickering, that light within the head often manifests as the desire to bring the light of knowledge into the outer world. When it becomes more steady, then it becomes more the light of wisdom that is wanting to be more directly brought into the outer world. Now, both of those could be viewed as a horizontal expression. In other words, the radiation of let's say that the wisdom of the soul is shaping our perceptions. The light of that wisdom is shaping our perceptions at any given time. And that wisdom is then carried forward because there's a compelling urge to bring it forward as a function of service to others. That's still got a horizontal feel to it, which is fantastic because that's the motive of service, friends. That's the core of service. But also gradually, another kind of alignment is occurring that's heightening vertically. And that the more that wisdom of the soul can be radiated through the fabric of your thoughts and your life and your service, the more we become that lighted lamp has a vertical quality which creates what is called the connection with the cloud of witnesses, the connection with the cloud of witnesses, which is another way of saying with the ashram and the masters within the ashram. You see, the cloud of witnesses. So this light within the head has a deep correlation, both as a function of alignment with the ashram, as well as a commitment to bring light into the outer world, to let your light shine, as the Christ has invoked for all of us. Very important, very important. Now, having said all of that, there's a correlation that you might be interested to know about this light within the head as well. One of the correlations has to do with what we call the third eye. And, you know, the third eye is the eye of the soul in a way. And the third eye has got measures of how far it is opened. And so the third eye doesn't fully open until what we call the third initiation, which is called the transfiguration. But for all of us, we have at least partially open third eye. And of course, that's always better than none at all. And that third eye is, you know, it is said that when the etheric body, that's your chakra system, when this chakra, the ajna, and the crown chakra, when there's an etheric interface where the two are relating to each other in bidirectional fashion, that's what begins the process of opening the third eye, which correlates to the awakening, which correlates to the opening of the igniting of the lighted lamp, although flickering. And then later, as you evolve your consciousness, and particularly once that flickering becomes steady in your life of service, then it indicates that another chakra, which is said to be the back of the head, at the place where the base of the skull and the neck come together, it's called the Alta Major Center. Now, when that chakra becomes enlivened, it energetically is said to create a triangular relationship between those three chakras. And a circulatory process occurs. This indicates that not only is the light steady now, but it's getting larger, brighter, I should say, and it indicates that the third eye is opening more and it's getting much closer to full open. When it's fully open, You'd have to be almost like a master. That's called the Eye of Shiva. For you and I, it's called the Eye of Vision. And that the third eye is said to reposition itself into the center of the head. And so that's really where the third eye is. A lot of times people think it's this ajna center. That's just the chakra that symbolizes it. That's not the third eye. The third eye is deep in the etheric head, in the very same region that I mentioned the lighted lamp to be. In a way, they're interchangeable in a way. It's also a place where the antakarana anchors itself. Now, some of you may know what the antakarana is, but antakarana is a Sanskrit word, and it represents the communication bridge that links the soul with the personality. And there's the whole science of the antakarana and the building of the antakarana. And in a way, the antakarana is something that, you know, you build it over many lifetimes, but you build it with acceleration when three things are integrated into the fabric of your life. One is heartfelt service to humanity. Two is to study, and by so doing, you build your higher mind. And three is meditation. Those are called the three pillars, and they all facilitate the process of building this vertical structure, because you see, it doesn't exist naturally. It has to be built. And, but its anchor point for us is right in the center of the head. In fact, when you fall asleep, so you know, just to give you, is when you fall asleep, it is said that the antakarana dislodges itself from the brain cavity and begins to draw itself back up to the causal body. And in fact, the whole study of dreams, which is a big part of this philosophy too, a branch of this philosophy called esoteric psychology, the nature of dreams has to do with where that thread is in the cycle of going back to the causal body. But what's important here today is to understand that it's in that same place in the center of the head where that antakarana finds its anchorage. So we got the lighted lamp in the center of the etheric head. We got the eventual resting place, you might say, of the third eye in the center of the etheric head. And we also have the anchor point for the antakarana. But there's another thing too. Some of you may have read my book. I have a whole section on this. It's called The Cave. Now, the cave is a place deep inside the etheric head where more and more of that antakarana is being built, the cave represents the place of a kind of it represents a portal. And once the antakarana is fully built, it can bring you instantly through mere will into the ashram, internally recognized. For you and I, we're trying to climb our way in our meditative life, etc., to kind of get into some sort of meditative, energetic relationship to the ashram. But the day comes when literally through the center of the head, and the light that is now radiating very brightly from the center of the head gives you instant access to the ashram at will. That's what we call movement from disciplic life to initiate life, actually. So you can see this place where the lighted lamp is filled with activity, and right in the center of the head, the third eye, the cave, the antakarana, all of that is there. So in a humorous way, it makes me think, you know, when you bring your spiritual life out into the world, and, you know, there's a lot of people out there who are not awake at all yet, and therefore, when you try to share some of your light with them, they may not be very receptive. And in fact, internally, they may be saying to themselves, it's all in his or her head. If they ever knew how true that was, it really is all in the head. So anyway, I hope you get a sense of that. And you know, the other thing about this lighted lamp is that and its relationship to the third eye is so important. You know, maybe some of you know this, but when we tie this into astrology, where there is a certain sign of the zodiac that is said to be the most related to the third eye, and that's the sign of Taurus. You have heard the expression, the hitting the bull's eye, the Taurus bull's eye. We sometimes think that that's an archery term, but it's actually much older than that. It's a reference to the bull in the sky. Just look at the old paintings of the zodiac. You'll see the bull always has one eye. So Taurus has long been associated with the eye of the bull, the eye of vision, the eye of God. And Taurus is called the sign of the light bringer, the sign of the light bringer. And why that I bring that up, because it is a bit of a tangential subject here, but there's a reason that it's worth mentioning. And that is that there's something called the new group of world servers. Now, the new group of world servers represents the sum total of all people on the planet today who have had some measure of awakening to their soul. Therefore, they have some measure of a lighted lamp operative in their lives, who are also doing the hard work of trying to transform their lower self so that it becomes a better servant on behalf of the higher self, and in the process adds brightness to that lighted lamp within the head, and who are having an increasing sense of responsibility to make that uplifting contribution to humanity and a dedication toward that contribution without waiver. That whole group are in their millions now. Many of you, maybe all of you, but certainly many of you would be part of it, even though you may not be aware of it, because it's an inner group. It's a subjective group. But we are told in the esoteric literature, the masters have said to us that group in its totality is viewed as one entity by the masters and by the Christ. And that entity has often got another name. It's sometimes called the world disciple. So millions of people together, millions of disciples, millions of us together on the inner levels are seen as a single agency. And much of the future of humanity rests on the shoulders of the new group of world servers as we make this incredibly difficult transition to a new and dawning age. And now we're in the burning ground phase of it. And that's pretty clear. Just look at the news. But the reason I'm saying that is because there's a correlation between the new group of world servers bringing light into the world, the utilization of the third eye, and in fact, there's a mantra for it, the Taurian mantra. It goes like this: I see, and when the eye is opened, all is illumined. I see, and when the eye is open, all is illumined. So this is and because Taurus is an earth sign, there's a lot of emphasis today in our history to bring spiritual truth into a more grounded, real, practical expression in life. And we are moving into the age of practical mysticism and away from the age of mysticism. And it's the utilization of your third eye and the light that it can convey that is the story of the future. Now, by the way, when that radiance is full, that's what also triggers the Kundalini. So there's a correlation between the degree of radiation of the lighted lamp, which by now is lighted to the point of near halo radiance, and the triggering that triggers the Kundalini. Now, a lot of people talk about, oh, I had a Kundalini, I had a Kundalini, I had a Kundalini. Well, if you didn't have a full Kundalini, if you did, you would be a master. But there are minor Kundalinis that happen along the way. But I'm talking about the full Kundalini is actually very much connected to the full radiance of the lighted lamp deep within. So with that in mind, and we just have a few more minutes here before I have to end this talk, I'd like to talk a little bit, just briefly, about the 7 rays and the light that they bring forward. And I'm doing this because I'd like to also tell you that I could go with astrology and talk about each of the signs of the zodiac is actually a great agency of light. And as I thought about what I wanted to present to you today, I realized that to go through the 12 signs and talk about the light, that would take our whole time. But I do want to touch on the 7 rays. So let me show you another overhead that has to do with just introducing some of you to the names of the 7 rays and the kind of light they emit. So let me put that up for us. Okay, the 7 rays, agents of divine light. So I'm just going to go through each one and just for a moment share with you this. Now keep in mind that all of these rays, the rays are more fundamental, they're like the most fundamental. You know, it is said that in the ultimate sense, there's only one thing, one living principle. Some people call it God, some people call it Brahma, call it universal intelligence, call it what you like, but that one life, for reasons we cannot even fathom, incarnates itself in and as creation. It's the one becoming the many. And that's why you are not separate from the one life, you are a part of the one life. It's not God and creation, it's God as creation. That is the fundamental matrix of thought in the esoteric philosophy, as well as in Eastern thinking too. And when you study the rays and really get into them, you realize that as the one incarnates, the light of God, the light, the major light, the source of it all, it divides itself into 7 qualities of itself. And that's what we mean the rays. It's akin, by analogy, it's akin to the projecting white light through a prism, and it fragments itself into 7 colors of the visible spectrum. By analogy, that's what we're talking about here. And that those 7 rays then have an interfacing mixture of relationships throughout all of creation. And that you will find that each of us, is a mixture of these different 7 rays in differing proportions. And so there will be some measures of relationship to all of them. Okay, so let's look at each one. The first ray is called the ray of will and purpose, the light of will and purpose. So the first ray is a ray that has so much to do with the light of will itself. Will, you know, is as sacred as love. Will is the energy that is the driving force of evolution itself. So the first ray is the carrier of the light of will and purpose. Just as a quick side note, and then but I won't do this with all of them, but for instance, I mentioned that these rays are related to astrology. So for instance, it is said that, what I mean by that is that behind a sign of the zodiac, there's a more fundamental energy that's rayological, that is it's more of its root. And the first ray comes through 3 major signs. It comes through the age of the ray, the will of the first ray comes through Aries, it comes from Capricorn, and it comes through Leo. But in each case, that quality of the light of will manifests differently. In the case of, let us say, Aries, it manifests as the will to initiate, the will to initiate. In Leo, it's the will to be. In Capricorn, it's the will to achieve. So these are more fundamental energies that are then slightly modified according to the sign that they are expressing through. Let's look at the second ray. The second ray is called the ray of love and wisdom. It emits, therefore, the light of love and wisdom. The third ray is called the ray of active intelligence. And so in a way, these first 3 rays are very related to the Trinity. If I use Christian language, the first ray would be Father, Son, Holy Spirit. Or in Hinduism, it would be Shiva, Vishnu, Brahma. But it has to do with the intelligence of the greater life and the light and the transformative light of divine intelligence. The fourth ray has, and by the way, there are other names for these rays. I'm using certain generic names for them. The fourth ray is the ray of harmony and beauty. So there's a great light, a revelatory light that is present when we see beauty, and it's transformative. The fifth ray is called the light of concrete knowledge and science. It has to do with the light associated with precise thought. And the sixth ray is called the light of idealism and devotion. So for instance, idealism is a type of light. If you see an ideal and that ideal, it touches you deeply, you know that ideal is a kind of a gate to divine truth. It's one of the forms of divine light. And the seventh ray is called the ray of ceremonial order and magic, which sounds kind of mystical, but basically it has a lot to do with grounding spirituality. It has a lot to do with bringing heaven to earth, and a lot to do with giving good form to the spiritual principles that and the spiritual light that you inwardly sense. So these are the 7 rays, and I could spend a whole weekend with you just on those 7 rays. They weave into the whole philosophy. They're related to initiation. They're related to healing arts. They're related to the magical creative process. They're related to esoteric psychology. They have a deep relationship to meditative techniques. So it's a very big subject. But here, I'm just trying to share with you that these are like some of the most fundamental types of divine light that is trying to work through all of us in different proportions according to our nature, our karma, and where we are on the path of evolution. Thank you all for coming. I know this is a deep subject, and I hope that it gave you some insight into yourself, and understand that you are, each of us is a shining light. Each of us, it's really all about let your light shine, and let the many lights shine within you. Let your wisdom come forward. The world needs your wisdom and that light more than ever now. My goodness. And the light of love, and the various things that make you recognize that you have a gift to give to the world. It is said that gifts are prerogatives of the soul, talents are prerogatives within the personality, and skills are things that are developed by the personality. But gifts, your gift is really important, particularly now. So with that, again, I thank you all for coming. Many blessings. Bye for now.